lecture featuring Dr. Bettina Shea. I am Dr. Sakina Everett, an assistant professor in language and literacy education at the University of Georgia. I want to thank everyone who had the opportunity to come out yesterday to our conference where we featured Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. And I am so excited to have time today with Dr. Bettina Shea. By way of introduction, I'll share that Dr. Bettina Shea is a full professor and director of teacher education for the LaFetra College of Education at the University of La Verne. At the heart of Dr. Shea's work is the exploration of how who people are shapes what they do and the choices they make as educators. She is deeply committed to creating equitable spaces as a teacher educator that promote the success, sustenance, and empowerment of teacher candidates from marginalized subgroups, both through her teacher training and as they enter classroom spaces. On a more personal note, I want to note that Dr. Shea is one of the most amazing human beings I've had the opportunity to meet. I actually don't remember the very first time that I met Dr. Shea, but it was at a conference of sorts. And I feel like I've known her my entire life. When I connected with her to discuss justice as praxis in education, she just so humbly replied and was so thoughtful and really wanted to make sure that she was, meeting the needs of whoever showed up. And she is committed to issues of solidarity and Black and Asian solidarity. And she's always making space for people of color and trying to find ways to make sure that we have access and opportunities. And she's just, even though she's like a full professor, she's super dope. She's extremely humble. She operates with integrity, and she makes me a better teacher, a better researcher. And I'm just blessed to be in solidarity and in community with her. So with that, I would like to share the floor. Welcome, Dr. Shea.
Yay, and thanks, friends, for those of you who are introducing yourselves in the chat. I appreciate that. I was scrolling the participant list, and I am so excited to share space with so many people that I know and love from so many different places, whether it's Twitter or my work at Cal State Long Beach or my work at the University of La Verne or professional work. I'm just really grateful to be with you all today. Let me make sure that I turn on my captions. Okay, so good afternoon or good morning to my folks on the West Coast with me. I wanted to begin by thanking Dr. Everett for her invitation to speak with you all today, and also by thanking the Tongva Indigenous Nation whose land I come to you from. I also extend my thanks to those of you who are part of this talk with me. Thank you for being a community of people engaged in the inquiry of what justice as praxis can mean for each of us individually in our lives, personal and professional, and what justice as praxis can mean for us in community, society, and globally. And I just want to thank you for being here today, just a few weeks after an attack on our democracy and just a few days after the hope that the inauguration of a historic administration can bring. Before I go further into today's talk, I want to give everybody space to have a document open or a notebook to write on or a space to think, as I'm hoping this talk will be more questions than answers, and that the questions aren't meant to be rhetorical. They're meant to engage you in the work today, right now. And if you already have those things and you haven't yet introduced yourselves, feel free to drop in the chat who you are, where you're from, an acknowledgement of the Indigenous homelands you're occupying, if you know, and why you're here. So I've constructed the nature of this talk as a series of questions to reflect my understanding of justice as an ongoing inquiry, a living journey that we choose to be on, engage with, and to build from, and as an active force that can guide and move our work in powerful ways. So I want to start by asking, what does justice as praxis mean to you? So while we'll be engaging with many ideas about justice as praxis today, it's important that we define that for ourselves. How do you define justice? What does it look like, sound like, feel like? Who does it serve? And similarly, how do you define praxis? So Merriam-Webster defines praxis as action, practice, such as an exercise or practice of an art, science, or skill, or a customary practice or conduct. A second definition is a practical application of theory, right? And so we can look to the dictionary for definition of praxis, but justice is so much more personal, right? And I don't think we can have justice defined for us by a dictionary or someone else, although we may have commonalities in our conceptions of justice. And if you're looking for a definition of justice, I think Dr. Ladson-Billings yesterday really tackled some core conceptions of basic justice. And so I'd recommend going back to her talk. But back to the questions at hand. We know that the whole can be more than the sum of its parts. So I want you to think about either justice and praxis separately or together. But I'd really like you to reflect and write down your thoughts on what it looks like to you. And I'm going to ask us to share in a particular way. So what I'd like you to do is to type in the chat what justice as praxis means to you, but I want you to wait to hit send. So those of you who are in the Zoom room with me, I want you to type it in the chat, your definition of justice as praxis, but wait to hit send. And while you're doing that, I just want to shout out my dear sister, friend, and colleague, Nina Wooldridge, who's in the room with me, who taught me about this waterfall chat that we're about to do. So in a second, if you're here with me on Zoom, I'm going to tell you to hit enter, and we'll have this chat waterfall where the responses will cascade like a waterfall, and you'll be able to see yours in a stream of others' thoughts. So let me give you a second to do that. All right, so if you have a definition of justice and praxis or justice as praxis, I'd like you to hit enter now. I love it. I see justice as love, action to address wrongs, rooted in love, liberatory action. I see a lot of love. I see a lot of love and truth and radical love, reclaiming and correcting wrongs in action. I love it. I love it. Serving those who have been disenfranchised historically. Thank you so much, Keisha. Joy, love. Friends, this is so inspiring. And I think as you continue to let the waterfall fall, right, I want you to think about the themes that you see, right? Because these are things that sometimes we don't see within our educational spaces, right? All these things that you're identifying. And whatever stands out to you, that's exactly what needs to stand out to you when we're thinking about justice and praxis, because we don't all have the same justice journeys, and we don't all have the same callings and actions or engage in the same work. But we can all embrace justice as praxis in the spaces we live and work to move towards it in a more real way. So who are you? Who do you carry with you? On whose shoulders do you stand, and for whom will you be an ancestor? I was in a workshop a few months ago led by Django Paris, where he asked us who we bring with us into our work. And shortly after that talk, I spoke with my dear friend Tasha Austin, who's also in this room, who helped me think about not only who we carry into spaces, but who we leave a legacy for. And then yesterday at the start of our conference, Maisha Wynn opened by asking who we are and why we're here. And these questions are critical because we live in an individualistic society that often asks us to define ourselves by our roles rather than our relationships, what we do rather than who we are. And part of justice as praxis is reclaiming a right to define ourselves in ways that honor the people and the commitments that make us who we are. So I am the daughter of a single mother, a first-generation Taiwanese immigrant raised by a young widowed single mother herself in Taiwan during a time of Japanese imperialism and nationalist martial law. I am the daughter and granddaughter of women who defied society's expectations, but in many ways sacrificed themselves to bring a future to their children. I am the descendant of survivors, of fighters, of women who fought both loudly and quietly, who navigated systems not meant for their success, and who in doing so made choices that left me without my heritage language, with more questions than answers, with memories of trauma alongside memories of joy. And I carry their struggles with me, their unfulfilled dreams, my mother's untimely death, and all of it reminds me that I know how to survive, how to struggle. Dr. Ladson-Billings yesterday talked about our call to struggle. So I know how to struggle, but I also know how to dream of freedom and better. I know how to navigate and fight. I know how to lose and continue, and I know how hard it can be to keep going. I know the cost that losing one's connection to our culture can bring, and I know the pain of invisibility. So I stand on their shoulders to dream of freedom. At the heart of Bettina Love's freedom dreaming is courageous action grounded in love. And for me, that love is grounded in my ancestors. But it's also carried on the shoulders of other sheroes, including civil rights activists who you also see pictured, Grace Lee Boggs and Yuri Kochiyama. Asian American civil rights activists who stood in solidarity and with and worked alongside Black and working class movements towards community-based empowerment and prison abolition. I think also, I stand on the shoulders also of Audre Lorde, whose words remind me that I cannot stay silent. Mitsue Yamada, who reminds me that Asian American women's invisibility is not natural. And Bell Hooks, who reminds me of the power of love and community, which you all defined as justice. So I ask you, whose shoulders do you stand upon in this work? But as much as our ancestors are who we carry with us, if freedom dreaming begins with our ancestors, justice as praxis also calls us to look forward, to build from the choices of our ancestors, and to act courageously for those generations ahead of us. For me, this directly means my 4 children who are pictured, but indirectly also extends to future scholars, future teachers, the youth outside of my family, but inside my life, and to my communities. Our praxis will inevitably leave a legacy. So how do our definitions of justice play a part of that legacy? What time is it on the clock of the world? I mentioned Grace Lee Boggs as one of my sheroes, and she asked this important question that I come back to often when I think about justice as praxis. What time is it on the clock of the world? When we think about justice as action, as praxis that brings theory into action, we have to think about the context in which we live and work. I began writing this talk on January 7th, the day after white nationalists, insurrectionists, American terrorists, and their allies stormed the Capitol building, but also the day after Stacey Abrams and a coalition of on-the-ground advocates, many of whom had the most to lose during this pandemic, did what many thought was not possible, flipping both Georgia Senate seats and helping to elect only the 11th Black senator in the history of this country. I'm giving this talk just days after we saw a Black South Asian Vice President, Kamala Harris, get sworn in, and an incredible Black woman poet, Amanda Gorman, speak truth in verse to remind us of where we can move if we take up justice as praxis in and outside of education. We are always living in historic times, perhaps none more historic than the present. What does this tell us about the clock of the world? What meaning do we make when we look at the clock of the world, and how do we respond? What do you see? And what do you refuse to see? Paulo Freire reminds us that literacy is as much about reading the world as it is reading the word. In education, at whatever level we work, our task is to support students in reading their worlds. We have power in many of our contexts by determining what texts we introduce, written, visual, and based on the events in the world. We also have choice in whether and how we ask students what and how they are reading their worlds. With this power, we can erase entire histories, or we can support students in thinking through this time. When you look around the world, what do you see and what do you refuse to see? What perspectives do you bring in and do you refuse to bring in? What are you tied to and tied down by? And how do you support students in engaging with this world they are living in and the society they are part of? The powerful women behind the Disrupt Text movement, Lorena Germán, Kim Parker, Trisha Barvia, and Julia Torres, give us examples of justice as praxis, of introducing diverse texts to support students in seeing a world beyond a traditional literary canon. Through words, they support students to read the world. We can also, as my dear friend Marian Dingle reminded us on January 6th, bring the world into the conversations we have in the classroom to support students in understanding the world they are living in. But to do this, we have to begin by asking ourselves these questions. Where do you stand? Part of our response must come with being clear where we stand and recognizing that our positions are never neutral. You likely have heard the oft-quoted words of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Archbishop Tutu said these words to confront neutrality that led to the continued strength of apartheid in South Africa. Only after multiple national leaders were willing to take a strong stand against the colonial oppression of apartheid was that system dismantled. As I mentioned earlier, Audre Lorde similarly reminds me that my silences will not protect me and that your silences will not protect you. In another quote from her powerful talk, The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action, which at its core is a justice as praxis talk, Lorde asks us, what are the words you do not yet have? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you will sicken and die of them still in silence? I know that there are real risks in taking a stand, personal and professional risks that have true physical, psychological, and material consequences for each of us. But there is also power in taking a stand. And there are perhaps different but equally harmful physical and psychological consequences in staying silent. We cannot enact justice as praxis if we have not first examined and taken a stance on the issues of justice around us. And Audre Lorde tells us again and again, she reminds us in The Black Unicorn, when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak. Consider where you stand and when taking a stand is critical to living a life of justice. Who is your community? Who do you walk alongside? Who do you serve? Who do you show up for? Let us remember, friends, that we do not stand alone. I ask you to consider who is in the communities to which you belong. I mentioned earlier that we live in an individualistic society that divides us from one another and chooses to center our roles and our individual successes rather than the strengths of our communities and collective action. our stances are stronger, our movements are stronger, our praxis is stronger when it is done in community. And you can see that even the source of this talk is not from me alone, right? It's all about the work that I've been doing in community. Who can you count on? And who can count on you? Who will check you and check on you, sometimes multiple times, when your own ideological blind spots trap you? Who will keep you accountable in your walk towards justice? Who do you walk alongside in movements that are not your own, but in liberation struggles that are inextricably bound with yours? Who do you serve and what do you bring to your communities and those around you? How do you contribute? And who do you show up for? So let me tell you that communities hold you up and they hold you accountable at so many levels. And they can be local communities, virtual communities, affinity-based communities, family as communities. But I really want you to take a moment to think about who your communities are. In my everyday life, my family, my church family, my mentors, my sister scholar circles, my collaborators, some amazing Twitter friends, a Facebook Messenger group of Asian American scholars started by Sarah Park Dahlen hold me up. They check on me. They make sure I hydrate. Shout out to Marian Dingle again for those text reminders and Kelly Wickham Hurst for the Twitter vigilance. But they also push me to not privilege East Asian voices when I advocate for Asian American issues. Thank you for your tireless reminders, Noreen Nassim Rodriguez. And they remind me that I have limits and breaking points, and they stay with me when I hit those. So big shout out to Catherine Ye, Ruchi Rangneth, and Judy Yu. These are the people that remind me that I need to take a stand and show up, even when it would be far easier and more convenient to be silent. They are also the people who understand when I need a moment of rest. If we are to engage in justice as praxis, we would be foolish to do so outside of community. Grace Lee Boggs knew the power of community and spent her life dedicated to building community in her city of Detroit, working with generations of community leaders to evolve in multiple ways that always had community at its center. So in addition to the communities to which we belong, it's critical that we uplift and center the communities that we walk alongside. So it's likely that you began this week flooded with many quotes by Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in commemoration of his birthday and celebration of King Day. But one of my favorites comes from his letter from a Birmingham jail. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Even if we are not a particular member of a community, if we are engaged in justice as praxis, we must walk alongside and support other communities that experience injustice. I thank my sister friends, Drs. Keisha Porcher and Charmaine Bertrand, who have a brilliant podcast that you see me repping on my slide called the Black Gaze Podcast that centers their perspectives as Black women in the academy. I was blessed to be their first guest on the podcast talking about Black Asian solidarity. And in that podcast episode, we talked about the importance of coming together and talking not only about the erasure of historic Black Asian American alliances, but also about the importance of addressing issues of Asian anti-Blackness and Black anti-Asianness, which both only serve to uphold white supremacy by dividing our communities against one another. As an Asian American woman, I see this alliance historically in the life of Yuri Kochiyama, whose quote is in the background of my virtual background. Though most widely known through her friendship with Malcolm X, Yuri dedicated her life to Asian American, Black American, and Third World movements for civil and human rights, seeking to build an Asian American movement that was strongly linked to Black liberation. Throughout her life, she fought for political prisoners and used her voice to show up and advocate for others. So I ask you, in your life, who are you showing up for? Who are you contributing to? What purpose and who does your work serve? If you're an academic, whose stories and what stories are told in your research, in your classroom? Are you working with and for others in your research? Who are you teaching? And how does justice show up in your teaching? Who is listening and participating in your classes? So how can community affirm and support the necessary resistance we need to enact justice as praxis? So I do some research. This is some of my research. And as we think through this inquiry, we can build on the work of research and enact it in practice. So I want to talk just very briefly about a framework that my mentor and colleague, Dr. Hung Tran Nguyen, and I have developed and written about, called Asian American Feminist Coalitional Resistance. Now, we've used this work to talk about our own experiences as Asian American women, mothers, and educators in K-12 and higher ed spaces. But the framework really exists at the nexus of racialized and gendered oppressions that can be adapted to consider how we draw from community as strategies to resist contexts of marginalization. What I want to highlight about the framework here is that we exist within contexts of marginalization. And in order to enact justice, we must have strategies to fight that marginalization. So if you zoom in on the diagram, you can see that there's an individual component because yes, we all can and must engage in internal and individual resistance, whether it's pushing back externally through navigating and resisting marginalization, or through internal resolve and resistance to the norms of education that cause us to work until we die to serve institutions that don't fundamentally move justice forward. But so many ways of resistance in order to enact justice are actually found through community and showing up for one another. It happens through community cultural wealth, a framework from Tara Yoso, through mentoring that allows us to develop navigational capital, how we work through these systems not meant for us. It happens through learning histories of resistance in our communities and through coming together to enhance our social capital or our networks to resist. And for those of us who have privilege, it comes through using our privilege to support those who may not have the same privileges. It happens through bringing our own stories to theory and praxis, as we see in Sam Musaeus and John Tikkar's Asian Crit framework. And fighting the invisibility and silence that is expected from us. We need both to come together in coalition and push back in resistance if we are to transform inherently unjust systems in education spaces. And to show up for ourselves, we have to show up for one another. So this leads me directly to my next set of questions. Who has access to you, your work, your teaching, and your service? If we want to do justice as praxis, we cannot simply keep our work behind academic paywalls and live inside of echo chambers. Now, I know that the Twitter streets are not safe spaces, and I'm not saying that everyone needs to or should have access to your work, your life, and your humanity. But what I am saying is that we need to be intentional about who we give our best time to, how we share and spend our time, and where we put our work and writing. Just in this last week, I looked at my calendar and realized that what drains me most are meetings that I don't need to be at. Not deep, fruitful conversations that move us forward, but informational meetings where what is said could be communicated via email. And I'm working on being more intentional in terms of who has access to my time day to day. And I just want to thank my dean and mentor, Kimberly White Smith, who has been instrumental in helping me reframe the value of my time and reclaim that time. But access to your work is different, right? If we want people to have access to our work, we need to put it in places that they have access to. So I am working on a collaborative project with some chosen kin, some of whom may be here today. And we were in a discussion about where we put our writing, which was deeply personal and designed to speak to educators who feel alone within the neoliberal project of curricular design. Now, if we put it in a top tier research journal, right, which is what is valued by the academy, who would actually have access to it? Who would read it? We need to think about who we're doing the work for. And if we want our work to have access for folks, we need to give them access to it. And this can be a both and. We can speak back to academic norms in peer-reviewed journals, and we can write blog posts that inspire and prompt action. The other day, a colleague wrote to say that a blog that I co-authored and published on an open access blog site this summer with my sister friend, Nicole Howard, had impacted her work and been used in her classroom since she read it. Other friends and colleagues have talked about the power of a reflective piece co-authored with my angrier but awesome sister from another mother, Jung Kim, and my actual son. And I know you all are confused about who's actually in my biological family and who isn't, because I have so many sister friends. But I did write this piece with my son, my biological son. But it was a piece about the complexities of language loss, multilingualism, and reconnecting with our identities through heritage language, a deeply personal piece. And this is what's being used in classrooms, right? We need to publish and produce work that is available, accessible, and resonates with the experiences of the communities we want to reach. Otherwise, why are we even doing that work? So what is your role? How do we bring justice to the center and act in ways that honor our unique form of humanity? Now listen, at this moment in the talk, you may be feeling both fired up and overwhelmed, or at least I hope you're feeling that way. So I want to say that justice as praxis is not about burning out and doing all the things. And I'm saying it as much to you as I'm saying it to myself. Because those of you who are in the room who know me personally know that I try to do all the things. But it is a lie that any one of us has to do everything at every moment. So I'm going to invite you now to breathe with me. You see the breathing GIF or GIF on the slide here. I want you to breathe with me and consider what your role is in enacting justice as praxis. And to do this, as we breathe with the slide, I want you to consider where you have impact or might have impact, and what your unique talents and gifts are. Maybe you're a poet, maybe you're a writer, maybe you're an artist, maybe you're a K-12 classroom teacher. We all occupy particular places and serve in particular ways that can extend our impact. And while our roles do not define us, they are important to consider when we think about where we can enact justice as praxis. And as a side note, if you have privilege, like if you're in a situation where you have access to particular resources that others may not have, what is your role in either using those resources to enact or promote justice, and or sharing those resources with others? Okay, so I'm gonna really invite you to look at the GIF and breathe with me, okay? So let's inhale together. And pause. And then exhale. And pause. And let's inhale. And pause. And exhale. And pause. Let's take one more breath together. Inhale. And pause. And then exhale. and pause. Now listen, friends, if that's as much breathing as you've done all week intentionally, we got to work on breathing, right? Because we can't act if we're not focused on what the work is that we are called to do. So for me, justice as praxis has to exist in my mothering, in my teaching, in my writing, in my mentoring, and in my speaking. In embracing my identities, positionalities, and the privilege and struggle that they represent. Now, within these roles, I use my strengths to have conversations and use technology skills to promote justice or design curriculum and fill my children's bookshelves with diverse voices and critical perspectives and have conversations with them and write blog posts. Okay, so I do those things. But if you need somebody to make a flyer beautiful, or build a sustainable garden, or make cold calls, or if my children need someone to help them learn Korean or teach them patience, they should not come to me. That is not my role. I had to really come to a place where I could accept that I can't do all the things. I can learn to do some of the things, but I can also provide opportunities for others to really shine and to enact justice in community by honoring the unique contributions of each person that push a greater movement for justice forward. So I want you to think about what your role is. What inspires your unique personhood to act in ways that enable, support, and promote justice? And then I want to ask some hard questions. What risks are you willing to take? And what are you willing to give up? You cannot enact justice as praxis in education if your comfort is more important than the work of justice, and if you are not willing to take risks to work towards and practice justice. Now, some of us don't choose the embodied risks that exist because we exist. So returning to Audre Lorde, she speaks from an awareness that her existence as a Black lesbian woman poses in and of itself a threat to others' power. And when we come from those places, enabling justice is about believing that we have a right to do more than survive, as Bettina Love urges us. At its core, enacting justice often threatens existing imbalances of power, ideas and norms to which we have grown accustomed, and challenges that which is largely accepted. Seeking to recalibrate the balance of power involves risk. So where we have privilege, position, and power, are we willing to give it up? And I ask this not judging what risks you feel ready and able to take, but as an acknowledgement that if you are enacting justice as praxis, it may put you in uncomfortable, vulnerable, and frankly, frightening positions where people question whether you should be allowed to work, lead, educate, speak, or even live. Where people may attempt to discredit and dehumanize you from a place of fear and hatred. And if you're not prepared for these risks, if you're not prepared to give anything up, you're not really ready to enact justice as praxis. And I say that in all honesty, because I want to be honest with you. I hate risk-taking. My son and I joke about how we are not risk takers. And I hate confrontation. I feel it in my body. I feel the tremble. So enacting justice as praxis is hard for me. But remember who I'm bringing in to every space. Who would I be for my children if I was not willing to stand for, fight for, act for, march for, write for justice? If I was not willing to tell them the truth and help answer questions about the world around them? Who would I be for future educators that I work with if I was not willing to engage with their cultural and linguistic funds of knowledge, if I did not honor the assets they brought to learning spaces, and if I was not supporting them to think critically about how and what they teach? Who would I be for my communities and colleagues if the writing and research I engaged in did not bring attention to the structures that reproduce inequities and erect barriers for the success of educators and students of color? But also, there is our humanity. And so I ask how human you are willing to be, and how humble you are willing to be, and how much you are willing to grow. Justice is not a destination, it is a journey. Justice is active. That is why we are all here engaging with justice as praxis. And enacting justice requires humility. Listen, friends, I fail a lot in enacting justice aligned with my ideals because we live in a society that is based upon scarcity, individualism, and a model of success that centers superstars. And I am not a superstar. I am a very real person who often forgets she can't do it alone until my community reminds me to calm down. I am also a person that, despite my best efforts, can act in harmful ways, can erase and speak over voices, and can fail to acknowledge my own privilege. I am human, and I don't always get it right. But my humanity reminds me that justice as praxis requires humility, a willingness to own when we make mistakes and work to be better, a willingness to fail and to forgive, a willingness to always grow and learn because there are so many answers and so many people that I do not know yet. It also requires honesty with yourself and others. At some point in your educational life, you may realize that you have enabled or are enabling systems that are based upon reproducing injustice that don't represent who you are. And when you see yourself in those spaces, enacting justice exposes your humanity and humility and pushes you to grow in ways that may involve the dreaded asking for help. We are not meant to navigate unjust systems alone, and we must be willing to grow. So what gets in the way? When do you need to rest and start moving again? How do you start and keep moving? As I said earlier, it's not always easy or gratifying to enact justice as praxis, particularly in education. If you are like me, over the last year, there have been moments where you just can't, where the exhaustion and weight and heaviness of injustice everywhere you look has just been too much. In education specifically, sometimes it seems like our work is a free-for-all. We're taking a grounded stand based on things that you've dedicated your life to researching, and teaching becomes fertile ground for attacks on your personhood, livelihood, or intellect. So I want you to reflect honestly about what gets in your way and what stops you, and to think about ways that in those moments you can pause, rest if you need to, and start moving again. Or to keep moving in ways that authentically acknowledge the trauma that we can face for enacting justice. For me, facing threats to my personhood, my safety, or my family are certainly real factors that get in the way of enacting justice. And I'm always taken aback at personal attacks caused by advocacy for humanity, equity, and justice. But I know that fear causes people to attack. Perhaps more insidiously, a lack of time, energy, and a tendency to overcommit to things that are not my role get in the way of authentically enacting justice as praxis. It has perhaps become cliche to say that we cannot pour from an empty vessel, but it is truth for me. The Nap Ministry on Twitter and Instagram reminds us that rest is revolutionary and that each one of us needs time to rest and reflect, to ask ourselves these questions, which allow us to adjust our direction when we start moving again. When I'm stopped, it is community that reaffirms my need to rest and calls me back into action. And I have been so tired in the last 8 months, having to take multiple rests. But my community has supported me when I am loud and checked on me when I am quiet. When I wonder if it makes a difference to continue moving, I am reminded of who I am and the power of my voice, my work, and my actions in the name of justice by my community. And I just want to shout out people in the room who I haven't mentioned yet by name, who retweeted, commented, or in any other way have shared your support. I've just been so incredibly humbled by the nearly immediate response on social media when I shared I was giving this talk. Find this community, friends. Find a community that stands up for you when you are doubting yourself. If you are in communities that see you, they will call you into your own form of greatness and will not let you stay silent or stop acting in ways that promote justice. Opportunities to enact justice in education will be waiting for you and calling for you. And when you know who you are, who you serve, and what your role is, you can walk confidently into those opportunities at the exact moment you are needed. So now what? How do you enact justice as praxis in the place you're at? And how do we collectively enact justice as praxis in education? Perhaps you came to this talk expecting me to give you some clear ideas about your next step to enact justice as praxis in education. But as I said at the beginning of this talk, my hope is that this talk raised more questions for you than answers. Given the format of this talk and that it extends beyond my own personal circle, I don't know what your next steps are, but I hope that these questions help you think about what they can be. Whether it is to begin speaking and acting in ways that support justice, to continue working in the ways that you are working, to build and deepen community, or to align your work to your positions, passions, and the places that you can make an impact. Whatever it is, we must work towards collective justice by addressing and confronting injustice, by working and walking alongside one another, by using our gifts in ways that serve greater collectivity, by learning and living in ways that challenge racism, classism, ableism, homophobia, and other forms of injustice that impact the communities we belong to and walk alongside. So I want to end with this quote. That I hope will call you to action, by Grace Lee Boggs. You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it. Let us always remember our responsibilities to each other, to action, and to use the lives we have been given, always to walk towards justice in service of community and in honor of our collective humanity. Thank you. That's it for me. Dr. Everett, you coming back on to talk with me, or we letting the good people go?
Wow. You gave us so much just nourishment. Thank you so much. You completely and wholeheartedly embodied everything that I expected and wanted from you, and forcing us to think about justice as praxis. Thank you. Before I can ask you a question, I just have to say thank you. Wow, you are such an incredible human and powerhouse. Y'all better watch out. This young lady is about the business. Like I'm wow, my heart is so full. Thank you so much. Wow. You raised so many questions for us that I think it's difficult for people to come up with questions for you. But one thing that I was wondering about is that you noted that in this work around justice as praxis, that it is a continual practice. We're constantly acting, reflecting. It's a dialogic experience and exchange. And one thing I'm wondering about is that part of why I designed this conference is to really engage early career scholars, though clearly everybody and their mom can identify with the concepts we have raised thus far. And I also have a particular heart for nurturing women of color and doctoral students and teachers. And one things that you notice is that that you noted, my apologies, is that justice as praxis work is never meant to be done in isolation, right?
Mhm.
And that it's a continual practice. So, what, if any, advice might you have for people who are in spaces where they feel alone, um, or where they might be one of very few doing this very deeply engaging justice work? Um, how might early career and doc students and teachers in various corners of our space begin to like cultivate that community that is required in order to engage in justice as praxis work?
Yeah,
And,
so that's a great question. Are you done with your question, Dr. E? I don't want to cut
well,
you
I
off.
have a little like add on.
Okay.
I'm also wondering, in putting this conversation in conversation with the conversation with Dr. Latson Billings yesterday, I'm wondering what, if any, advice you might have for administrators, whether they're in K-12 spaces or in university spaces. How might you advise them in supporting young scholars and doc students or teachers in engaging in justice as praxis work? So I know that was like two really huge questions. um, but that's where I'm at right now. So I guess you can start wherever you want, and I will continue to monitor the chat for other questions that may come up.
Sure, that sounds good. So I appreciate that you focused on these two areas because they're two areas that are really close to my heart, and I think they're intertwined, right? So
Yeah.
one of the things I talked about and that some of my work is on is mentoring, right, or femtoring, and I
Yes.
think it's really, really important for us to think about the ways that we support one another in community. And I just want to say, it's weird to be referred to as a senior scholar because literally like 2 years ago I was a junior scholar, right? So it's fascinating to me how these notions shift. But what I think is important is that we always see these like superstars, right? Like people we consider to be outside of our league, but we're all just human, right? Like we all are just people, we're community members. And I just encourage people, if there's not someone that you want to be mentored by in your institution, if you see somebody that like, you're like, I want to be mentored by them, reach out to that person, right? Just reach out, send them an email. Most people are so wonderful. And I was sharing with a group recently, right, that I'm just always so surprised when people read my work, right? Or when people want to come to this talk and hear me speak. I'm like, me? Really? Because, this work is not meant to be done in isolation at all. And so I would say reach out. I would say, Twitter is actually, I'm a big Twitter fan and advocate, as you all know. So there's a lot of mentoring that can be done there. It's actually has been a really important space for me that has established a lot of really strong relationships for me.
Mhm.
But I think it's really important, like we have to find that work in scholarly community. And then also to just normalize like that this place is not designed for women of color to be successful. And so you need women of color mentorship to help you to understand like it's not you, it's the system, right? And to normalize it and to say, even though you see all these successes, let me tell you, there are also all of these places where I felt like failing or quitting or all of these things that are happening. So
Mhm.
I think more spaces where we can really keep it real
Yeah.
is really important. And then I just entered an administrative role this year, and
I'm aware. That's why
Yes,
I kind of put
yes,
you on the
it's a
spot there.
thing. It's a thing. And I want to say, I think that it is, it's hard being an administrator. And I am really glad that within this administrative role, I have a dean who is so supportive, who is a woman of color, who stands behind me and stands beside me, because I think that is really important. So I think the mentoring never, or the femtoring never stops. Trying to decolonize my language too, right? The femtoring never stops. It just shifts. And I think we have to, justice is a journey, right? Yeah. And I think that as administrators, I mean, my thing is always, wherever you're at, use whatever privilege you have to support those who have less privilege than you. Because I mean, as an Asian American woman who is now a full professor and administrator, there's all these levels of privilege that I have. And there's also all these levels of marginalization that I face. And it's not either or, it's both and, right? So as people support me, I also support others. And I think that's part of our responsibility. Otherwise, again, we're not really doing justice work, right? If we're not in it for everybody, you know, so I hope that answered your question.
Yes, someone raised a question from the chat that says, what are some of the strategies to prepare for pushback when administrators are evaluating us on a test-centered basis?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question. And I think one of the things is there's lots of research on how tests aren't the most valid measure of what students are learning. And I think it's hard, right? Because again, we're trapped in unjust systems, right? So I think putting out a call, right? Like if you're not in a research community, putting out a call, like, can someone help me access the research on how tests are not the best measure of student learning, right? Can someone help me to put together a rich way to speak back to this system, right? Or to also show people, listen, the test is very basic, right? The students aren't doing well on the test. Like if we listen to Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, the students aren't doing well on the test because they don't care about what's on the test, not because they're not capable of scoring well on the test, right? So I think, you know, I came through teaching, I was a middle school teacher, and I came through teaching at a different time, just at the beginning of No Child Left Behind. And so when I was teaching, I had just like 2 years, right, to do the curriculum that I wanted to do. And then I used my test scores to say, look, actually, my kids are scoring all better than what the average is everywhere. So let me do what I'm going to do. Let me do my justice-centered curriculum. Let me design my curriculum. Let me not go by this pacing guide, because I can teach them in ways that matter to them, and they will learn the things that will help you to help them to perform on your test. So I think it's learning to navigate within systems and then also showing a different way, right? Because we don't want to be co-opted by the systems either. And I think it's a challenge. It's a real challenge.
Yes. Wow. Wow. I can't believe this hour has gone by so fast. My cup is so full right now. I'm like trying to write and take notes. It's thank you for this gift. I wanted to note how beautifully you weave in scholarly as well as popular references together, and they sit side by side and they inform one another, and they inform your work and inform the questions that you've been raising for us. I think you serve as a model in a variety of ways how to do this work well. And so I have one more question. What advice do you have for getting the conversation started and encouraging colleagues to, begin this work?
Yeah, so that question is from Mr. Matt Maya, who, shout out to Matt, is my former credential student who is now a science teacher, and I love him. I just want to say, and yeah, it's nice that we made it almost all the way to the end without a Zoom bomber. It's fine, whatever. It is what it is. So I want to say to Matt and to anybody is I think it begins with acknowledging people's humanity and finding where your shared vision and goals are, right? I think when we are able to connect with what our core is, right? Because no one's going to say like, I don't believe in, that all children have a right to learn, right? So it's about connecting with where we share humanity and share values and then pushing people, right? And learning to respect that where people are at and we're moving them to that next step for them. And that justice work is a journey and that their next step and our next step may not be the same steps, right? And that's okay. Like it's about showing grace and that this movement is long, right? It's not done tomorrow, right? And so I think that's really, really important for us to think about and consider as we move the conversations forward, is just to acknowledge that we do have more in common. I mean, and I don't want to say that in a non-political sense, right? Because I also know like that seems like it's dismissive of like the very real, like racialized violence that we experience and gendered violence and even violence through Zoom bombing, right? But I mean, I think if people are willing to engage in a conversation, it's about engaging them where they're at and then also knowing what is safe for you and where you need to step away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this time and conversation. We do need to wrap up our conversation. I can't thank you enough. You've given us so much to work with. You are a blessing. You are a sage. It's just like, thank you. I'm so hyped right now. Now it's time to do the work. So thank you so much.